Welcome to the Path Podcast, where we will travel the lives of some bold women, from dreams to detours to destiny. She did not choose this path. This path chose her. This is the Path Podcast. Welcome back, Path listeners, and today I'm back with a solo episode to wrap up 2022 and put another successful year in the books. It's me, your girl, your motivator, your confidence builder, the one who believes that purpose is bigger than obstacles. And Path listeners, today in this 2022 year in review, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for taking your time in your busy schedules to sit and listen to me and these bold women that come on the Path Podcast bi-weekly, sharing their stories of overcoming obstacles, turning obstacles into opportunities, into businesses, finding their voice, and also just discovering their path back to self. Before I thank each one of you, let me say again, we do not share these stories for entertainment purposes, but to give you a survival guide of how we overcame major obstacles in our lives that we didn't enjoy, that we didn't see coming sometimes, and just to let you know that you can also. This is not something that is for the faint at heart. Some of these stories marvel me, I know. And trust me, a lot of times women don't know our strength until we are put into the fire, as we've heard before. And these women, all that came on this show, did just that. They came through the fire. We're not saying our lives are perfect, but we can tell you that we are better because of it. Better things came out of it. It is just to motivate you and encourage you to know that if I went through this divorce and I've got so much joy in my life that the same thing can happen to you. I always say on the Path Podcast, do not compare my chapter 20 with your chapter 1. That chapter 1 is no fun. That chapter 1 hurts like hell. That chapter 2, you have to kind of okay, get yourself together, girl. Shake that thing off a little bit. Start looking in the mirror. You have to talk to yourself. Talk to yourself. I am big on motivating myself. I have to encourage myself. I refuse to allow another human being to speak their unsolicited advice onto me and take it for the Bible. They didn't create me, nor will they break me, nor will I allow them to break me. Now, hear me clearly. I'm not saying it's easy because we all are human, right? But I refuse to allow anyone to overlook me, dismiss me, or feel like your opinion of me and your unsolicited advice will define me. So I hope with all the stories that were shared that you have it encouraged many of you out there who listen to the Path Podcast bi-weekly. And I hope that it takes you on that journey of discovering your own survival guide to coming through your obstacles or things that challenge you in your life. All of our stories are different. Our survival guide will be different. We will tweak it to fit your narrative on what will help you overcome that obstacle. But what I can say that I believe will be the same is that you can survive it. You can survive whatever is placed in front of you. Just do the work, my sister. On this Path Podcast, let me say, I want to thank each one of you for listening, as well as going into all my guests, everyone who took their time and sat down and gave us that 45 to an hour, 15, 20 minutes sometimes. I'm working on that coming in 2023. I am reducing this thing down. I have to no more than 40, 45 minutes. Okay, give me 50 minutes. But I may change the platform a little bit. You may hear a lot more motivational conversations coming in. I want to have some girl chats because I want to have real stories because of the topic that's coming up. So make sure you catch the last episode of the year because I'm going to say what to expect in 2023 as we move into the new year. There will be some changes and some of the things that still stay the same. But I am excited about what's to come and what will happen. I want to thank each one of you again. I want to have more interaction with those that listen, just to get your feedback on what you want to hear more of, anything that you want an update on. I would be happy to bring that content to you that aligns with the Path Podcast and where we're going. Today, let's get into me also thanking the amazing guests that I've had on the Path Podcast in 2022. I spoke on so many different topics because on the Path Podcast, it's about the path, our journey, moving through life, overcoming obstacles again, and forging a path forward to a better life. We talked on the topics of normalizing grief. We spoke to fitness gurus and nutritionists. We spoke to a money coach. We spoke to a relentless boss. And we also spoke on some of those other heavier topics. Even though those topics are very heavy as well, we spoke on topics of domestic abuse, substance abuse, molestation. We spoke to someone who experienced breast cancer. And again, a lot of these women built organizations and nonprofits because of it. Some even discovered their journey after some of those traumatic experiences and got their masters and discovered self, found their voice, and is building a future moving forward. Another great guest and I talked about how she started a podcast called How Coronavirus Saved Her Life, how it changed her life, how she peeled back the layers of having a narcissistic mother and alcoholic father, as well as the heavy topic of race, and how finding some documents that her parents had and how they viewed race and how we can move that conversation forward. I've spoken to guests who experienced brain trauma from being shot at her as she was preparing for her 21st birthday. Wow. And to find out all the amazing things that she's doing, you have to go back to those episodes and check them out. I will have them in the show notes and a link to each podcast. I also had a guest who dealt with infertility, which is a big topic today that needs to be talked about more and more. So she created the So Now What podcast, where she talks about and help other women to learn that even though she's still childless, that you can create a meaningful and purposeful life, even though she's not a mother. And after some of these topics, we have to go into our spiritual side again. And I brought someone in with a wonderful book entitled Merciful Moments that talks about how God's mercies are new every day and how we can always, it's always an opportunity to start again. And along with our spiritual, we have to bring in our therapists. I read something that said, God created therapists, so it's okay to see one. So, we have to have therapists in here. I was going to save that until the end, but when we talk about all of these things, I am big on having therapy. And I brought in some of the best therapists here on the Path Podcast. All of their information will be in the show notes, so you can connect with them to see if their program offers you what you need to move forward in this journey called life. We work on our physical, we need to work on our mental. We need to talk some things out that we've dealt with in our lives. It is a wonderful, wonderful thing to have someone you can share and release and have someone pour into you and tell you maybe why you're experiencing certain things. There's nothing wrong with having a therapist. If I wanted to quote every therapist, I could do that here. But just like my last therapist in December said on her podcast, she's never met anyone who has spoken their truth and not feel better. So let's consider working on that mental as well as our physical and all the other things that we work on to make sure that we're being a better version of ourselves. Some of my other guests spoke about their businesses, being entrepreneurs, being in a male-dominated field, in construction. And sometimes, like she said, we have to slay some dragons as women. One of my guests also who built a product called the CPR wrap, talked about how she was told that she needed to find a white face to put on her business brand, so she can grow the business. Those are examples of us trying to slay some dragons out here, especially as women in business. I also have one called the Relentless Boss, who is doing amazing work in her world of trying to help people move into their purpose and discovering being relentless about what their pursuit into purpose. I recently read an article from Tony Evans where he was counseling a young man, and the young man sat down and said, "Pastor, I feel as if my detours has met another detour." And they got married and had a baby detour. In other words, he felt as if he was running into detours after detours. And the detours merely kept replicating and multiplying rather than taking him anywhere meaningful. Tony Evans said, "It's easy to feel that way when God is taking you to your destiny. This is because before you can ever get to where God wants you to be, He has to do some twists and turns. In life, as it is often on the road, detours exist because construction is taking place. When you're on a highway and there's a detour, it usually means that workers are trying to fix, build, correct, or improve something. Similarly, God will take us on a detour because He is constructing something in our lives as well. Granted, detours are anything but convenient. They take you out of the way. They take longer than you originally planned to travel, but they are necessary. God is more interested in your development than your arrival. He cares more for your character than your comfort, your purity than your productivity. Development takes time, tests, failure, and overcoming. God knows each of us individually. He knows what we need in order to develop and strengthen our spiritual muscles and sharpen our spiritual insight and wisdom. Just like all the women on the Path podcast, to come through everything we've come through, we had to build our spiritual muscle to overcome a lot of these obstacles. We're still striving. We're still not saying we've reached any pinnacle yet, but we are still striving and will continue. We all understand that detours can disappoint us, but that's only for a moment. But when you allow them to produce hope, God promises that hope will not disappoint. We touched on so many everyday topics that women deal with. But to be honest, we know there are so many more that needs to be talked about and discussed on this podcast. And it is my job to bring it to you. Bring it to you where it's going to impact your life for the better. As we wrap up today's episode, I want to say again, thank you to everyone, from the listeners to my guests and to my daughter, who is my podcast editor. Trust me, I'm trying to work on getting things to her in a timely manner. She's a tough businesswoman, but I am doing my best, and I want to thank her for all she does to help me bring the Path podcast to you. Don't forget to check out the very last episode, which will be coming in 2 weeks, which I will share what to expect in 2023. You know, in the month of December, I believe we should take a step back and take a break, enjoy the family during the holidays, as well as look over where I want to see the podcast go and what I need to do and how to grow the podcast more in the months to come, in the years to come. So if you know anyone who can benefit from this podcast, please share it with them. If you know someone who will be a great guest, share it with them. Tell them to connect with me. I am booking guests for 2023. So if their stories align with the Path podcast, please share this podcast with them and have them connect with me, or send me their information, and I will definitely reach out to each one of them and ask them to be a guest on the Path podcast. I will end the show with my favorite quote, by John McDonald. It says, "Every problem introduces a person to herself." What problem are you facing today that could get you back on the right path of who you're really called to be? to rediscovering a purpose bigger than yourself, to finding that voice again, to bringing back on the surface something that you once loved that you buried so long ago. The world is waiting on you, my sister. Do not sit there and think that you are not called to something bigger than yourself. And when you rediscover that voice and ready to tell your story, just know you will always have a sister here cheering you on and waiting for you to come on the Path Podcast to share your story so you can help somebody else. I love to say my crown is not complete until every woman wears her crown confidently. Until next time, Path listeners. Thank you everyone for hanging with us. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and other platforms so you can stay up on our bi-weekly real conversations with these bold women. You can follow the Path Podcast on Facebook at the Path Podcast and on Instagram and Twitter at the Path_podcast. And if you would like to be a guest on the show or have questions for a future show, you can email us at thepath4ward@gmail.com. That's thepathforward@gmail.com. And if you're looking for a speaker or you're in need of a life coach, please reach out to me. Again, at thepathforward@gmail.com or at ACKORLEH@gmail.com. Thank you. Until next time.